If you have been following our channel, you know that we have already done a few videos related to Harry Potter, but there are so many questions that keep coming up. For instance, what if Dumbledore was not in the Harry Potter universe? Honestly, imagine for a second that Albus Dumbledore never existed. I know that sounds wild, but stay with me here, because when you really think about it, the entire Harry Potter universe would collapse like a house of cards. I'm talking complete and utter chaos. So in today's video, we're diving deep into this alternate reality where Dumbledore was never born, and trust me, it gets dark really fast. So quickly grab your bucket of popcorn, click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring the bell icon so that you never miss another update from our channel. The Grindelwald crisis would have destroyed everything. Let me start with probably the most catastrophic consequence, and that's the global Wizarding War. Back in 1945, Dumbledore defeated Gellert Grindelwald in what witnesses described as the most legendary duel in wizarding history. But here's the thing, without Dumbledore, that duel never happens. Grindelwald wielded the Elder Wand and had been spreading terror across Europe for nearly 2 decades, running parallel to World War II. His followers, called the Acolytes, believed in his vision of wizards ruling over muggles under the banner of "for the greater good." The scary part is that Grindelwald's movement was gaining serious traction. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, his influence had spread across continental Europe, and he'd recruited giants, dark creatures, and disaffected wizards into his ranks. The wizarding world was literally begging Dumbledore to step in and stop him because they knew he was the only wizard powerful enough to do it. Dumbledore was actually terrified of confronting Grindelwald for years because they'd made a blood pact as teenagers that prevented them from fighting each other. But when the situation became desperate enough, Dumbledore found a way to break that pact and finally faced his old friend. Without Dumbledore in the picture, Grindelwald would have been completely unstoppable. Think about it. Who else could have challenged him? The guy had the most powerful wand in existence and was considered one of the greatest dark wizards of all time. He would have established his new world order where wizards ruled over muggles, and the International Confederation of Wizards would have been powerless to stop him. The global wizarding war would never have ended in 1945. Instead, it would have stretched on for decades, maybe even into the present day of the Harry Potter books. The entire wizarding world would be living under Grindelwald's regime, and magical Britain as we know it simply wouldn't exist.
Who are you?
Well, I'm like you, Tom. I'm different.
Tom Riddle's path to darkness accelerates unchecked. This is where things get even more twisted, because Dumbledore's influence on Tom started way back in 1938 when he visited Wool's orphanage. Dumbledore was the one who told 11-year-old Tom about the wizarding world and brought him to Hogwarts. During that very first meeting, Dumbledore immediately sensed something dark in Tom. The kid had been using his powers to hurt other orphans, stealing from them, and showing zero remorse. But here's what most people don't realise. Dumbledore was the only person at Hogwarts who kept a close watch on Tom Riddle throughout his entire time as a student. While everyone else was impressed by Tom's brilliance and charm, Dumbledore never trusted him and never let his guard down. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened for the first time and Myrtle Warren was killed, Dumbledore was deeply suspicious of Tom, even though he couldn't prove anything. When Tom framed Hagrid for the attacks, Dumbledore knew something wasn't right, but didn't have enough evidence to act. Without Dumbledore at Hogwarts, nobody would have been watching Tom Riddle closely. There would be no one questioning his activities or being suspicious of his behaviour. Tom would have had free rein to experiment with dark magic, recruit followers, and create his Horcruxes without anyone batting an eye. The teachers would have just seen him as the brilliant, model student he pretended to be. More importantly, when Tom applied for the Defence Against the Dark Arts position years later, someone else might have actually given him the job. Dumbledore was the one who denied him that position both times he applied, specifically because he knew Tom had become Lord Voldemort and didn't want him anywhere near students. If Voldemort had gotten that teaching position, Imagine the damage he could have done. He would have had direct access to hundreds of young, impressionable minds at Hogwarts. He could have recruited an entire army of Death Eaters from within the school itself. The Knights of Walpurgis, which later became the Death Eaters, would have grown exponentially faster and stronger. Voldemort's first rise to power, which began around 1971, would have been far more devastating without Dumbledore's opposition. The Order of the Phoenix never exists. The Order of the Phoenix was founded by Dumbledore specifically to fight Voldemort during the First Wizarding War. Without Dumbledore, this organisation simply never would have existed. The original Order included incredible witches and wizards like James and Lily Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Mad-Eye Moody, and many others who fought against the Death Eaters. They were the primary resistance force against Voldemort's reign of terror from 1971 to 1981. Without the Order, the First Wizarding War would have been completely one-sided. Voldemort and his Death Eaters spread fear by marking murder scenes with the Dark Mark and using the Imperius Curse to turn friends and family against each other. The Ministry of Magic was already struggling to maintain control, with Minister Eugenia Jenkins dealing with internal chaos and eventually being replaced by Harold Mincham, who also proved ineffective. Hogwarts was described as the only safe haven during this time, specifically because Dumbledore was there, and he was the only wizard Voldemort truly feared. Imagine how much worse things would have been without Dumbledore organising resistance efforts. There would be no coordinated opposition to the Death Eaters, just scattered attempts by individual auras and ministry officials who were already overwhelmed. Sure, you could argue that the major wizards would still have opposed Voldemort, but come on, Voldemort would have taken over the ministry far earlier, probably by the mid-1970s instead of 1997, because almost no one alive was as brilliant and strong as him. Harry Potter dies as a baby. The prophecy that Sybil Trelawney made about Harry and Voldemort happened during a job interview with Dumbledore at the Hog's Head Inn. Dumbledore was interviewing her for the divination professor position at Hogwarts when she suddenly went into a trance and delivered the prophecy about a boy born at the end of July who would have the power to defeat the Dark Lord. Without Dumbledore conducting that interview, the prophecy never gets made, or if it does get made to someone else, it might not have the same impact. But let's assume the prophecy still happens somehow. The real problem is what comes after. Severus Snape overheard part of that prophecy and told Voldemort about it, which is what set everything in motion. When Snape realised Voldemort was going after Lily Potter, the woman he'd always loved, he went to Dumbledore in desperation and begged him to protect her. This moment was absolutely crucial because it was when Snape switched sides and became Dumbledore's spy. Dumbledore agreed to protect the Potters and placed them under the Fidelius charm, with Peter Pettigrew as their secret keeper. But the main problem that arises now is, without Dumbledore, none of this protection happens. There's no one for Snape to turn to, no one powerful enough to hide the Potters effectively, and no one to ensure their safety. Even if the Potters tried to hide on their own, they wouldn't have Dumbledore's expertise in protective magic. If and when Voldemort finally tracked them down on Halloween 1981, there would be no sacrificial protection for Harry. Lily's sacrifice created that ancient magic that protected Harry because she willingly died for him. But without the complex web of circumstances that Dumbledore helped arrange, that protection might not have manifested the same way. More likely, Voldemort would have just killed all three of them, Harry included, and that would be the end of it. No boy who lived, no hero to eventually defeat the Dark Lord. Hogwarts falls into chaos and danger. Let's talk about Hogwarts itself, because without Dumbledore as headmaster, the school becomes incredibly vulnerable. Dumbledore served as headmaster for decades and was responsible for keeping the school safe during multiple crises. When the Philosopher's Stone needed protection, Dumbledore was the one who coordinated the defences with other teachers and ultimately designed the Mirror of Erised challenge that ensured only someone who wanted to find the stone, not use it, could obtain it. Without Dumbledore, Nicholas Flamel probably would have kept the stone at Gringotts, where it was originally stored, or maybe not moved it at all. But more importantly, When Voldemort possessed Professor Quirrell and tried to steal the stone, there would be no Dumbledore to intervene at the last moment. If in this scenario Harry was still alive, Harry would have been completely on his own. And remember, he was only 11 years old at the time. Without Dumbledore's protective enchantments and his timely arrival, Voldemort probably would have succeeded in getting the stone and returning to full power years earlier than he did in the books. The Chamber of Secrets situation would have been even more catastrophic. When Ginny Weasley opened the chamber in Harry's second year, Dumbledore was removed as headmaster temporarily by the Board of Governors. But before he left, he dropped hints to Harry and Ron about following the spiders. And his Phoenix Forks came to Harry's rescue in the chamber itself. Forks blinded the basilisk so Harry could fight it, brought him the sorting hat, which contained the sword of Gryffindor, and then healed Harry after he was stabbed by a basilisk fang. Without Dumbledore, there's no Forks to help Harry. There's no one dropping cryptic hints about how to find the chamber or how to defeat the basilisk. The basilisk would have continued attacking students, potentially killing many of them instead of just petrifying. And here's a terrifying thought. Without Dumbledore around, who would even be competent enough to run Hogwarts, the school would probably end up with some ministry-approved puppet headmaster who couldn't protect students from real threats. The Horcrux hunt never happens. Dumbledore was the one who figured out that Voldemort had created Horcruxes to achieve immortality. He spent years researching Voldemort's past, collecting memories from people who knew Tom Riddle, and piecing together the puzzle of exactly how many Horcruxes existed and where they might be hidden. Dumbledore showed Harry these memories in their private lessons during Half-Blood Prince, specifically to prepare him for the mission of destroying the Horcruxes. Without Dumbledore's detective work, nobody would know about the Horcruxes. When Harry stabbed Tom Riddle's diary with a basilisk fang in Chamber of Secrets, he wouldn't understand the significance of what he'd done. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring, and Nagini would all remain hidden and protected. Even if someone managed to kill Voldemort's physical body, he would just keep coming back over and over again because his soul fragments would anchor him to life. Dumbledore also discovered that Harry himself was an accidental Horcrux, created when Voldemort's killing curse rebounded. He understood that Harry would need to willingly sacrifice himself to Voldemort in order to destroy that piece of soul. Without Dumbledore's guidance, Harry would never learn this crucial information, and Voldemort would remain effectively immortal even if someone got lucky and destroyed his body temporarily. Snape remains a pure Death Eater. Severus Snape's entire redemption arc hinges on Dumbledore. As we already discussed, after Snape realised his information about the prophecy had put Lily Potter in danger, he turned to Dumbledore as the only person powerful enough to protect her. When Lily died anyway, Snape was devastated, but Dumbledore convinced him to honour her memory by protecting her son and working as a double agent against Voldemort. Dumbledore was the only person who knew about Snape's true loyalties, and he spent years protecting Snape from suspicion from both sides. Without Dumbledore, Snape never switches sides. He remains a loyal Death Eater throughout the First Wizarding War and beyond. This means there's no spy in Voldemort's inner circle, feeding information to the good guys. When Voldemort returns to power in 1995, there's nobody positioned to gather intelligence about his plans. Snape played a crucial role in the Second Wizarding War by maintaining his cover and feeding Voldemort false information while helping the Order of the Phoenix. Plus, without Dumbledore arranging for Snape to be the one to kill him, the plan with the Elder Wand falls apart completely. Dumbledore intended for the wand's power to die with him, because Snape killing him under prearranged circumstances wouldn't constitute a true defeat. This entire elaborate scheme was designed to prevent Voldemort from ever mastering the Elder Wand, but without Dumbledore orchestrating it, the wand's allegiance would follow a completely different path. Imagine a Voldemort who truly possessed the powers of the Elder Wand.
For magic, I promise to restore this temple of tolerance.
The Ministry falls into incompetence and corruption. Throughout the series, we see that the Ministry of Magic is often incompetent, corrupt, and easily manipulated. The only reason they don't completely fall apart is because Dumbledore provides a voice of reason and moral authority that even Ministry officials can't entirely ignore. When Cornelius Fudge refused to believe that Voldemort had returned in Goblet of Fire, he spent an entire year trying to discredit both Dumbledore and Harry. But Dumbledore's reputation was so solid that many people continued to believe him, despite the Ministry's smear campaign. Without Dumbledore's influence, the Ministry would have been even more dysfunctional during both Wizarding Wars. Fudge offered Dumbledore the position of Minister for Magic multiple times, but Dumbledore always refused because he didn't trust himself with that kind of power after his experiences with Grindelwald in his youth. But his refusal to take the job didn't mean he had no influence. As Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Dumbledore wielded significant political power and used it to guide policy in the right direction. Without those checks and balances, Ministry corruption would run rampant. During Voldemort's first rise to power, ministers like Eugenia Jenkins and Harold Minkham proved ineffective at dealing with the Death Eater threat. Without Dumbledore's pressure and guidance, they would have been even worse. The Ministry might have fallen to Voldemort decades earlier, or it might have devolved into such chaos that the wizarding world descended into civil war even without a specific Dark Lord to rally around. The Deathly Hallows remain unknown, although the world of Harry Potter is quite big and defined, and, honestly, well known. This is something that most people tend to overlook. Dumbledore was one of the few wizards who truly understood the Deathly Hallows and their significance. His youthful obsession with the Hallows alongside Grindelwald taught him valuable lessons about power and mortality. When Harry needed to understand the Hallows during Deathly Hallows, he received crucial information from Dumbledore's portrait and from the memories Snape gave him. Without Dumbledore's knowledge, the full story of the Hallows might never come to light. Harry wouldn't understand why the Elder Wand was so important, or how its allegiance worked. The Resurrection Stone hidden in the Gaunt Ring would just be another mysterious object, and nobody would understand its true purpose. The Invisibility Cloak would still be in the Potter family, but its significance as one of the Deathly Hallows would remain unknown. This lack of understanding would have massive consequences during the final confrontation with Voldemort. Harry's comprehension of the Elder Wand's true allegiance and his willingness to die were both informed by lessons he learned from Dumbledore. Without that knowledge, the final battle might have gone very differently. Marvelous verdict. So yeah, the world would definitely not be the same without Dumbledore. It would be exponentially worse in every conceivable way. The brightest timeline for the wizarding world required Dumbledore's presence, his wisdom, his power, and yes, even his manipulations. Without him, darkness wins, evil triumphs, and the magical world descends into an age of terror from which it might never recover. That's the harsh reality of how important one person can be to the fate of an entire civilization. Pretty sobering when you think about it, right? If you enjoyed this video, comment down below what your take on this idea would be like.